As a lawyer, you have to choose your experts very, very carefully, and this case is a perfect example of that. Hi, Tony DeWitt here. I'm a Missouri appellate attorney, retired, and I bring you a fresh perspective on the law without offering any legal advice. So pull up a chair. This is what we're discussing today. When you ask an expert to give you an opinion, you are asking for testimony, things that will come into to the courtroom and will get in front of the jury as evidence. In other words, their opinions are evidence just the way the length and breadth of a piece of tool is a, is a piece of evidence, or the weight of a hammer is evidence. All of those things are evidence and they are generally weighed equally. So you have to be really careful about who you hire because sometimes the experts don't do what you ask them to do, which is tell you all of their opinions up front so that you're prepared to bring them through a deposition. Many years ago, I had a great pulmonary doctor out in Colorado who had agreed to become our expert in a case involving a lovely lady who had died from adult respiratory distress syndrome after surgery. And in that particular case, what we argued was that her course after surgery went steadily downhill and everybody just sat around and did nothing. And that's a pretty accurate description of what happened to the lady. But the problem for us was that she had been a cigarette smoker and she died from lung disease. And as a result, juries tend to blame that on people who smoke. Whether or not that's fair, that's the way it is, and you have to overcome that. So I went out, I prepared the expert for his deposition. We went through all of his opinions, and he gave those opinions right down the line, just one after another. And I thought, okay, we are ready to go to the deposition. So we get into the deposition, and he starts giving his opinions. And the last one is that, this is what caused her death. And the guy said, "Do you want to add anything else to that?" And the guy said, "Well, yeah, she probably only would have lived another couple of years, maybe 2 years more. One for sure, two maybe." He never had told me that. And I was just flummoxed. It was too late to name another expert in that case, and I had to live with that. So I had to basically go to the jury and say, okay, she's going to live this long, at least this long, but that's what his opinion is. But he's right on the medicine, but he's wrong on the length of life that she would have. Although, as I've thought back over it over the last probably 20 years, I realize he probably wasn't off by much because once lung disease gets into its end and final stages, it can be pretty debilitating, and a lot of people can't even walk across the room without running out of breath. So, you have to be really careful about what experts you choose. One of the nice things about being out in California, where Mr. Jackson is that you have access to a lot of really good educational institutions. There's USC, there's UCLA, there's USC Berkeley, there's all kinds of colleges out there with medical schools, and all those medical schools churn out doctors by the bushel basket every year. And as a result, a lot of them are available to offer their expert opinions in different things. Well, if you get somebody who has never testified before, you pretty much have to put them through trial school first so that they can understand how easily their words can be twisted against them. And as a result, not be prepared when the deposition comes and they wind up screwing things up for you the way my good doctor did. Even though, again, I don't blame him, probably was the truth, certainly what he believed the truth to be. So I can't really fault him for that. I just wish we could have done better for the family on that. We did get a verdict, it just was not a very good one. So keeping to that issue, one of the things that I've noticed in the Karen Reed case is how good these experts are. Watch this examination of Dr. Laposada, both the direct and the cross examination, It is an indication of somebody who has done this enough that she doesn't fall for trial lawyer tricks.
Okay, so this sort of roundish thing is the brain stem, and the arrows are pointing to the red areas. So there's a blood vessel that's broken there because it's been torn and pulled, with surrounding blood going into the neuronal tissue here and over here and over here. And also some of this is also bleeding, with the blood looking brown because the brain was placed in formaldehyde. So all this brown area, the red area, should not be there.
Is this type of herniation life-threatening?
It causes death. Yes, it is life-threatening.
How quickly, we can take that down. How quickly, doctor, would you expect that this could cause, let's first talk about incapacitation.
Yes.
How quickly would someone be incapacitated after they suffer a coup contra coup injury of this magnitude with the concomitant injuries that you see in the brainstem?
Well, there would be two parts to what that injury would cause the body to do. First, there would be immediate unconsciousness because of the transfer of all the energy to the brain and the massive skull fractures. So that, so that would disrupt the normal function of the brain and produce immediate unconsciousness. Then the brain would start to swell, and within 15, 20 minutes or so, then that brainstem starts to go down the opening in the bottom of the skull, and then the blood vessels are broken, the brainstem gets compressed, and the centers in that brainstem which control the heart and the respiration then stop. So you go unconscious, brain swells, then you die.
When you looked at Mr. O'Keefe's brain, obviously it's after he already expired, correct?
Congratulations, Mr. Brennan. You have just asked an insane question. She is a pathologist. Pathologists deal with dead bodies to give us diagnoses and to explain causes of death. Obviously, if she's examining the brain, which nobody does directly, she's a pathologist. Obviously, he's dead. You just can't make this kind of stuff up.
Obviously, yes.
And so you didn't have any clinical observation of the progress of his injury that night, did you?
I was not observing him. I did not observe how he got his injury.
When you gave an estimate or you give an opinion about how long he was alive for, are you aware that there's certain tests that are done by neurosurgeons when people are suffering brain injuries, but there's an attempt to save them?
Sure.
Have you ever heard of a Guzman coma score?
Glasgow, you mean?
No, it is Glasgow, but you've heard of Guzman?
It's called Glasgow coma score.
Have you ever seen the assessment that a level 1 trauma center goes through when they're trying to save somebody with a brain injury?
I'm generally familiar with the emergency procedures to save somebody's life.
Have you ever read any statistical studies attempting to correlate the brain injury with the time somebody would live for?
I'm aware of that, and I see that in my practice of people who have survived brain injuries and die of something else. Then I can look at the brain and understand how the brain can heal or react to injuries.
And many people who suffer coup contra coup will go into a brain surgeon center, and many of them pass after time, don't they?
Every case is different.
Right. Some might live for an hour, hours, weeks, months, or survive the injury. Isn't that fair to say?
It depends on the case.
In this case, you don't have any objective criteria to identify the amount of time Mr. O'Keefe would have lived if he had the appropriate help. Isn't that fair to say?
I don't think it would have been effective because there were massive skull fractures to the base of the skull, and there are cases where the amount of force and energy applied to the head causing skull fractures, breaking the neurons, causing the brain swelling. Despite rapid medical treatment, those people cannot be saved. They can't effectively stop the brain swelling.
Many people can't be saved. Did you know that about 1/3 of them do get saved?
I don't know what you're talking about. 1/3 of everybody has different sorts of injuries. 1/3 of what?
With a clivus fracture, coup contra coup. Are you aware that 1/3 of those patients survive if they get the proper treatment?
It depends on the amount of force.
Okay. Are you aware that a study would show? Have you ever read a study by Isaac Wolf on clivus fractures?
No.
Have you read any studies on clivus fractures?
Clivus fractures? Yes, I understand what clivus fractures are. It's a part of the base of the skull.
Okay.
And
Okay,
go ahead.
please. Did you want to?
No, you go ahead.
Oh, I'm sorry. Have you read any studies that tell you, with the proper treatment, despite these potentially catastrophic injuries, that 1/3 of patients can survive?
No, but that's not the case we have here.
And so, in this case, I asked if you had any objective criteria. You don't have any objective criteria about the progress of Mr. O'Keefe's wound that can be a basis for you to conclude that he would have died in 15 minutes. Isn't that fair to say?
No, I understand what happens to the brain when it gets that sort of injury. I understand the time course and the physiology. I've seen hundreds of individuals who've had brain injuries. Some survive for a longer period, some die earlier, and it depends on the amount of force and the amount of brain swelling. And in Mr. O'Keefe's case, we had the massive skull fractures of the base of the brain and immediate swelling and subarachnoid and subdural. So he had a large force applied to his head, which caused the brain swelling and the and the progression of the brain stem down through the foramen magnum that stopped the brain. It was a very forceful impact.
So as you can see, Hank pulled back a little bit with Dr. LaPosada. He wasn't over the top aggressive, but he didn't succeed nearly as well with Dr. Rentschler as he did with Dr. LaPosada. I think there's something about a man going up against a man that looks better if you're tight with him, as opposed to if you get over the top of your skis when you're dealing with a woman who is testifying. It looks very bullying if you pressure them and force them to change their opinion, that sort of thing. So in this situation, he's talking to Dr. Rentschler, and Dr. Rentschler was really, really good on the issue of the arm and the force on direct. And then on cross examination, he did pretty much the same thing that Dr. Laposada did. Let's watch.
In terms of your review of this particular photograph, what did you note in terms of trauma or injuries at all?
I did not note any indication or any signs of trauma or injury to the forearm or to the wrist in this case.
If we could go to 229C as in Charlie. What are we looking at in this photograph?
This is the right humerus, the right upper bone of Mr. O'Keefe's right arm.
Do you notice, or did you review this in furtherance of your analysis?
I did, yes, sir.
Did you note any defects, trauma, injuries at all with regard to the bone is the
humerus.
The humerus?
I did not, no, sir.
What about the joints associated with the humerus, top or bottom?
I did not note any injuries or damage to either the elbow or the shoulder joint either.
What is your opinion in conclusion, having reviewed all three of these x-rays, with regard to the condition of Mr. O'Keefe's right arm, starting from the arm, the forearm, and the bones in the hand?
There's no indication of any type of acute injury from the x-ray to Mr. O'Keefe's right arm, either his hand, his forearm, or his upper arm.
Mr. O'Keefe, how much did he weigh?
216, I believe.
How tall was he?
He was 73 inches, I believe.
So that is not a representative height and weight for Mr. O'Keefe, is it?
That height and weight, no, sir.
And so if you were making projections or analysis based on limb weights, they would be inaccurate if you didn't make adjustments, correct?
Well, they would certainly, the force on the limb would be less if you use a lighter limb. So if Mr. O'Keefe is heavier than the hybrid 3, and I use a hybrid 3, the forces I calculate would be an underestimate of the actual force acting on his body.
If you didn't make an adjustment, but you relied on the numbers from the test 3, the hybrid 3 dummy, ultimately the conclusions would be off, wouldn't they?
They would be an underestimate. Yes, the actual forces would be higher.
And so did you make any conclusions, or did you know that when Dr. Wolf did his tests using the hybrid 3 dummy, he didn't make any adjustments?
What do you mean? What adjustments would he make? You get the acceleration, but the acceleration's not going to change, and that's what we utilize. Then you can scale the weight of the body, but I'm not sure what he would have made adjustments for.
When you looked at the ratio, force and mass, you use a lighter weight, mass changes, doesn't it?
And this question right there is the explanation for what I always say. You have to know more science than the science expert in order to question them appropriately. Because you can't say if the weight changes, the mass, the mass changes, because the weight is the mass. Mass is the scientific term for weight. It must drive Rensler nuts when this guy is asking him questions like a third grader.
If you use a light, sure, yes.
And that changes the force equation, doesn't it?
That can, yes.
And so when you were discussing yesterday at the beginning of your testimony about the 50% dummy, had that issue been raised with you?
No, sir, it had not.
You had testified before, hadn't you?
In this case?
Yes.
Yes, sir.
And you knew there was a sequestration order?
Prior?
Yes.
Yeah, I didn't discuss the case with anyone, no, sir.
Well, you didn't discuss it with anybody, you said?
I did not, no.
Before you testified last year, you were receiving information from your employer about issues and testimony in the case.
The party that retained us told us things. I didn't break any sequestration. They were the ones in contact with the court. So it was my assumption that whatever they were telling me was allowed by the court. They were the client. I didn't discuss anything with them or tell them anything. But yes, they told us certain things.
Two experts, two tour de forces of how you go about presenting an opinion in a court of law. The direct exam was very well done on both, and the cross exam didn't touch them. That's the nice thing about getting really good experts who really understand the medicine and getting people who can teach. Both Dr. Laposada and Dr. Rensler are good teachers. They can teach the jury what the jury needs to know. You notice that Dr. Rensler used the anatomical names for the radius and ulna in the forearm. That's something that a trained testifier does because he wants to teach the jury. Not because he's an advocate, but because he wants them to understand the science. And there is great beauty in the science and in the anatomy and physiology of the human body. You know, when a child is born, when they come out of the mother, they switch over from all of their breathing and circulation occurring in utero to the point where they take their first breath. When a child takes his first breath, he generates a negative 70 centimeters of water pressure in terms of breathing in, which is roughly equivalent to trying to suck a golf ball down a garden hose. And at the time that he does that, there is a flap in the heart that closes. There is a duct that runs between parts of the lung and the heart that closes. He switches over from fetal circulation over to neonatal circulation, human circulation, and it is a beautiful thing to see. It is a miracle in many respects that it happens, but it does happen. Having somebody who can explain that to a jury is that's the kind of expert you want, because a confused mind always says no, but a well-informed one can usually make the right decision. That's what I have for you today. I hope you found it helpful, interesting, or maybe both. If there's a subject you'd like me to discuss, please feel free to send me an email at the address above. If you like what we do, please feel free to subscribe and come on back to the beach tomorrow. I release videos every weekday, weather and work permitting. If you have the opportunity today, do a kindness for your fellow man. It makes the world a better place, one kind act at a time. And now, YouTube has some suggestions for other videos of mine that you might like.